The heavy oak door of the Berlaymont building clicked shut behind the aides, sealing the room in a hush broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. Ursula von der Leyen sat at the head of the polished table, her fingers steepled over a slim folder stamped with the EU crest. The late afternoon light filtered through bulletproof glass, casting long shadows across maps of Europe pinned to the wall, red lines marking Russian advances, blue zones for NATO commitments. She glanced at her watch. 4:17 p.m. Brussels time. The secure line to London buzzed to life. Keir Starmer's face appeared on the screen, his office in Downing Street a stark contrast. Bookshelves lined with legal tomes, a Union Jack draped subtly in the corner. He leaned forward, tie slightly askew, eyes sharp. "Ursula, good to see you, though I wish it were under better circumstances." Von der Leyen nodded once, her voice steady as polished steel. "Keir, the circumstances are what they are. The SAFE Fund launches in 3 weeks. 19 member states have pledged, $150 billion total, with loans at 1.5% interest to rearm against the threat we all face. The UK wants in. Your defense firms stand to gain $12 billion in contracts alone. But without the $675 billion contribution, that's off the table." Starmer exhaled slowly, the sound crackling through the speakers. He picked up a pen, tapping it once against his desk. A rhythmic click that echoed his restraint. "We've been clear from the start. Post-Brexit, we operate as equals, not supplicants. That sum? It's calculated on outdated GDP shares from 2019. We're offering $4 billion instead, tied to specific joint projects. No blank check for Brussels bureaucracy." The room in Brussels felt smaller. An aide shifted in his chair, papers rustling like dry leaves. Von der Leyen opened the folder, sliding out a single sheet. A breakdown of SAFE allocations. Equals, you invoke equality while demanding 50% non-EU sourcing in our buys, up from the 35% cap. That's not partnership, it's cherry-picking. Russia has 1.2 million troops on the eastern flank. Ukraine reports 4,500 casualties last month alone. If the UK sits out, those contracts go to Rheinmetall or BAE's continental rivals. Your firms lose 28% market share overnight. Starmer's jaw tightened. He set the pen down with deliberate care. "And if we pay your full ask, what then? Access to intelligence sharing? Preferential tariffs on steel exports? We've reset relations since May, trade up 7%, fisheries disputes resolved. But this feels like payback for leaving. The British public won't stomach $675 billion when our NHS waits lists hit 7.6 million. Von der Leyen leaned back, the leather chair creaking faintly. The air carried the scent of fresh coffee from a side table, untouched. She met his gaze through the pixels. "Payback? No. Security. The fund covers 450 new artillery pieces, 120 drones per nation. Without unity, we fracture. France pushes for exclusion. Clauses already, your refusal hands them ammunition." The call stretched, minutes ticking by in loaded silence. Starmer rubbed his temple. "We'll review the figures, but equal terms mean equal say. No veto power for the Commission on UK bids." A soft knock at the Brussels door, her chief of staff whispering urgently. Von der Leyen muted the line for a second, listening, her expression hardened. "Keir, one more thing. Our analysts show your MOD has quietly approached NATO for bilateral arms deals, bypassing SAFE entirely. If that's the play, expect tariffs on your $22 billion in annual exports to the single market." Starmer's screen flickered as he adjusted his position. "Speculation. We're committed to European defense, but not at any cost." The tension coiled like smoke. Von der Leyen closed the folder with a snap. "Then decide by week's end, or the offer expires. November 30th, deadline for applications. Miss it, and the UK watches from the sidelines." The line went dead. Von der Leyen stared at the blank screen, the room's silence pressing in. Outside, rain began to patter against the windows, blurring the view of the European Parliament. Her aide approached, holding a tablet. "Madam President, a leak just hit the wires. Anonymous source claiming Starmer called the fund extortion. Reuters is running it." She stood, smoothing her jacket. The numbers swirled in her mind. $150 billion at stake, Russia's shadow lengthening. But this was just the opening salvo. In London, Starmer pushed back from his desk, the pen rolling to a stop. His phone vibrated, a text from the Foreign Secretary. Brussels sources say von der Leyen prepped a counter dossier. Details on our hidden NATO talks incoming. He rose, crossing to the window overlooking the Thames. The city lights flickered on as dusk fell. If word spread, Parliament would erupt. Labour's slim majority tested, opposition baying for blood. But deeper, in the shadows of the call, something else stirred. A whispered alliance forming across the Channel, one that could upend the fund's very foundation. The rain-slicked streets of Brussels gleamed under sodium lights as Ursula von der Leyen's convoy pulled up to the Commission headquarters. Inside the secure briefing room, aides clustered around a bank of monitors, the air thick with the aroma of damp wool and cooling espresso. She entered without a word, shedding her coat to reveal a crisp white blouse, sleeves rolled to the elbows. The leak had hit 2 hours ago. Reuters, quoting an anonymous UK source. Starmer labels safe fund extortionate Brexit revenge. Shares in BAE Systems dipped 3.2% in after-hours trading. Von der Leyen took her seat, eyes scanning the draft statement. We respond tonight. No concessions. Across the Channel, in a wood-paneled chamber off Downing Street, Keir Starmer paced before a fireplace, its flames casting erratic shadows on portraits of past primes. The Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, stood by the window, phone in hand. Parliament's lighting up, Prime Minister. Tories are demanding an emergency debate, claiming you've sold out British jobs for Brussels pride. The $12 billion in potential contracts? They're calling it phantom gains now. Starmer stopped, hands clasped behind his back. The room smelled of polished oak and faint pipe tobacco from a previous occupant. He nodded to his press aide. Counter it. Emphasize our $4.2 billion offer tied to 40% UK sourcing, not their 50% demand. And remind them, Russia's seized 18% more Ukrainian territory this year alone. We need the fund, on our terms. Von der Leyen's press conference unfolded in the Berlaymont's marbled atrium, cameras flashing like distant artillery. She stood at the podium, flanked by flags, EU blue dominant, a subtle nod to unity. The SAFE initiative is Europe's shield. $150 billion to deliver 2,500 tanks, 800 fighter jets, and cyber defenses against threats that know no borders. The United Kingdom's participation is welcome, but equal contribution means equal stake. $675 billion isn't a penalty. It's parity based on 2024 GDP shares. Refusal risks isolating London from 70% of the continent's procurement market. A journalist thrust a microphone forward. Madam President, is this payback for Brexit? Her pause was calculated, a beat of silence heavy as lead. It's pragmatism. Without commitment, access ends November 30 theory. Simple as that. In London, the response came swift. A hastily arranged briefing in the Foreign Office, Lammy facing the press corps under chandeliers that tinkled faintly in the draft. The Prime Minister's position is firm. We contribute fairly, but not blindly. The EU's formula ignores post-Brexit realities. Our economy grew 2.1% last quarter, while theirs stagnated at 0.8%. We're pushing for joint oversight, not vetoes from Brussels. And, let's be clear, sidelining the UK weakens NATO. We've committed $50 billion to Ukraine aid since 2022, more per capita than Germany. Murmurs rippled through the room. A reporter pressed, "What about the extortion leak?" Lammy's smile was tight. Anonymous noise. Our focus is security, not sound bites. The exchanges echoed across networks, headlines blazing. Starmer versus von der Leyen, defense dollars or diplomatic divorce. In Brussels, von der Leyen's team huddled in a side office, the glow of laptops illuminating strained faces. An analyst pulled up projections. Without UK funds, SAFE's first tranche drops by 4.5%, delaying drone deliveries to Poland by 6 months. She rubbed her forehead, the weight of 27 member states pressing down. Draft the letter to Starmer, invite him to a summit, November 28th, neutral ground in Luxembourg, but warn, if he brings demands, we'll bring ours. Her chief aide nodded, typing furiously. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the panes like impatient fingers. Starmer's evening meeting dragged in Number 10's cabinet room, maps of Eastern Europe spread across the table. Red arrows showing Russian troop movements, 450,000 strong near Kharkiv. Defense Secretary John Healey leaned in, voice low. "The leak's boomerang, sir. Our backbenchers are fracturing, 15 MPs threatening revolt if we budge, but intelligence says France is lobbying hard. Macron wants UK exclusion to boost Dassault sales by $8 billion. Starmer tapped a finger on the table, the sound sharp in the quiet. "Then we escalate quietly. Reach out to the Dutch and Nordics. They owe us from the May reset. Offer bilateral tech shares, our Storm Shadow upgrades for their F-35 data." Healey exhaled, gathering papers. The clock struck 10 p.m. Fatigue etched lines on their faces. As the night deepened, an encrypted message pinged on von der Leyen's secure phone from a contact in The Hague. "UK sounding out us on side deal. Counter?" She set the device down, staring into the dim corridor. The safe funds launch loomed, but cracks were forming. Whispers of a Franco-German push to cap non-EU bids at 20%, squeezing Britain further. If Starmer bypassed them, the entire $150 billion architecture trembled. In London, Starmer retired to his study, the fire dying to embers. Lammy lingered at the door. "One more thing, Prime Minister. Our embassy in Brussels picked up chatter. Von der Leyen's prepping a dossier on those NATO talks. Names, dates, $2.3 billion in preliminary bids." Starmer's gaze hardened. The alliance across the channel wasn't just forming, it was armed and aimed straight at his throat. The Luxembourg summit chamber overlooked manicured gardens shrouded in morning mist, the air inside crisp with the scent of polished brass and fresh linen. Ursula von der Leyen arrived first, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor as she took her place at the oval table. Flanking her, French President Emmanuel Macron, his fingers drumming a silent rhythm on a leather portfolio, and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, eyes fixed on a tablet displaying safe projections, $150 billion pool now strained by 2.1% if UK access faltered. The clock read 9:45 a.m. Starmer was due in 15 minutes. Von der Leyen opened a sealed envelope, extracting a dossier stamped Confidential EU Internal Review. "Gentlemen, today's revelation starts here. The UK's maneuvers aren't just refusal, they're subversion." Keir Starmer entered with David Lammy at his side, the door whispering shut behind them. The room's central chandelier cast prisms across the table, highlighting the tension in Starmer's posture. He nodded curtly, settling into his chair. "Ursula, Emmanuel, Olaf, let's cut to it. Our $4.2 billion stands with 40% UK sourcing. The November 30th deadline? Flexible, if we align on oversight." Macron leaned forward, his voice laced with Gallic precision. "Oversight? You demand it while your MOD signs $2.3 billion in shadow NATO pacts, bypassing SAFE for bilateral drone deals with Poland and the Baltics. We've documents, contracts dated October 15th, favoring your firms over European ones by 35% margins." Von der Leyen slid the dossier across, pages fanning slightly, emails, wire transfers, meeting logs. The top sheet, a breakdown of UK's preliminary bids, totaling $1.8 billion rerouted from EU-eligible projects. "See here, 28% of your proposed contributions were earmarked for non-safe channels. Russia exploits this. Their incursions in Donbass up 14% since September, 3,200 Ukrainian troops lost in the last quarter. Your games cost lives, Keir. And markets, BAE shares down 4.7% on leak fallout, while Thales gains 2.9%. Starmer's hand paused midair, then took the file. He scanned it, jaw clenching. The paper rustled under his fingers. "This is selective. Those packs secure our flanks. NATO's core. Your funds buy European clause locks out 62% of British tech. It's not subversion, it's survival." Scholz cleared his throat, the sound gravelly in the hush. He tapped his tablet, pulling up a graph. EU defense spending at $312 billion annually, UK's at $62 billion, yet London sought veto on 15% of allocations. Facts, not accusations. Our review shows your refusal inflates SAFE's loan rates by 0.3%, adding $450 million in interest for Germany alone. Berlin pushed for your inclusion, Olaf did. But this? He gestured to the dossier. It reveals a scheme, quiet lobbying to the Nordics, offering F-35 data swaps to undercut our drone consortium. If you join, pay full $6.75 billion. Otherwise, exclusion clause activates December 1st. Lammy interjected, voice rising. Exclusion? That fractures the alliance. We've sunk $50 billion into Ukraine, more than France's $38 billion. Bister Saudi Kateki and she the Confrontation and NATO's eastern flank weakens by 22% in air cover. The debate heated, voices overlapping like clashing swords. Macron slammed his portfolio shut. You left the table in 2016. Now you want the meal without the bill. Our parliament demands parity. 19 states pledged, Ukraine included, for $12 billion in munitions. Your shadow deals siphon 8% from joint cyber funds. Von der Leyen watched Starmer, her gaze unyielding. The room's air grew stale, a faint hum from the ventilation underscoring the pauses. Starmer set the dossier down, pages aligning with a soft thud. We'll audit this internally, but reveal more. Your internal splits. France wants 50% non-EU cap to boost Dassault. Germany lowers it to 25% for unity. Who's subverting whom? Outside, protesters gathered. EU flags waving beside Union Jacks, chants echoing faintly through the glass. Media vans lined the drive. Reporters hungry for the first crack. Inside, Schultz's aide slipped him a note. Leak confirmed. Dossier excerpts to Politico. UK sources counter with EU bullying memo. The Chancellor exhaled loudly, folding the paper. Von der Leyen rose slightly, addressing the group. This isn't Brussels versus London, it's Europe versus division. Sign the parity accord by noon or the review goes public. Full scope, including your NATO end runs. Starmer met her eyes, the weight of the numbers pressing down. $150 billion at risk, Russia's shadow claiming 450 square kilometers weekly. As the summit broke for a recess, Lammy pulled Starmer aside in the corridor, walls paneled in dark walnut. Prime Minister, intelligence just in, von der Leyen's team has recordings. Your call to the Dutch PM last night, promising $800 million in tech shares to bypass SAFE. Starmer's face paled. The revelation wasn't just documents, it was a noose tightening. But in the dossier's fine print, buried under transfer logs, lay a counterhook, evidence of French kickbacks in the fund's allocation, $1.2 billion funneled to select firms. The midday sun pierced the mist as they reconvened. Macron's phone buzzed. A Brussels alert. Elite reactions pouring in. MEPs calling for emergency session. The balance tipped, but the real storm brewed in the shadows of betrayal. The corridors of the European Parliament in Strasbourg thrummed with hurried footsteps, the air heavy with the scent of printer ink and stale croissants from the morning briefings. Ursula von der Leyen strode past clusters of MEPs, her security detail a shadow at her heels. The dossier's leak had ignited a firestorm, Politico's headline screaming, UK's NATO shadow play, 2.3b bypassed for SAFE. But buried in the fallout, Starmer's counterpunch, a memo hinting at French irregularities, $1.2 billion in facilitation fees to Dassault subsidiaries. She entered the secure committee room where Macron and Schultz waited, faces etched with strain under the harsh fluorescence. Emmanuel, Olaf, this escalates. The UK's evidence is thin, but it sows doubt. Public reaction. French polls show 58% viewing SAFE as Brussels favoritism. We reveal our full audit today. In London, Keir Starmer's team crammed into the windowless basement of the Foreign Office. Screens flickering with live feeds from Strasbourg. David Lammy unrolled a chart. EU defense stocks volatile. Thales up 1.8% on exclusion rumors, while Rolls-Royce dipped 3.4%. Prime Minister, the memo landed. MEPs are demanding an independent probe. Your dossier implicates Macron's aides in 12% overpricing on FCAS jets. Starmer nodded, loosening his collar in the stuffy air. A fan whirred overhead, stirring papers. Good, but von der Leyen's audit? It names our Dutch talks, $800 million in tech swaps, dated November 22nd. If they drop it, Parliament revolts. Our majority shrinks by 7 seats on defense votes. John Healey, Defense Secretary, tapped a pen against the table. Society's stirring too. Protests in Manchester, 5,000 calling for fair funds, fearing job losses in Sheffield's arms plants, 12,000 at risk. Von der Leyen's audit unfolded in a packed plenary session, the chamber's vaulted ceiling amplifying every murmur. She stood at the rostrum, projector beams slicing the dim light. Ladies and gentlemen, the safe fund stands at $150 billion, with 19 states committed. Loans at 1.5% to procure 1,200 missiles, 350 artillery systems. But UK's maneuvers reveal a scheme. 28 preliminary contracts rerouted, costing the fund $450 million in lost synergies. Figures here: October 15th, emails from your MOD to Warsaw securing 22% of Polish drone bids outside EU channels. Slides flashed, redacted logs, transfer trails totaling $1.8 billion. Gasps rippled. A Polish MEP rose, voice sharp. This weakens our flank. Russia's 1.2 million troops idle while we bicker. Macron shifted beside her, whispering urgently, Ursula, the French angle. Hold it back. Our $38 billion Ukraine aid dwarfs their $50 billion per capita boast. The revelation hit like a shockwave. In the gallery, journalists typed furiously. Social media exploded. Safe leak trending, 2.4 million views in an hour. Secondary players emerged, a whistleblower from the Commission's audit team, anonymous to Le Monde, alleging internal pressures to bury the French fees. Von der Leyen paused, the room's silence thick as fog. We demand transparency. UK, recommit $6.75 billion by November 28th, or exclusion clause triggers, losing access to 70% of procurement. $12 billion in contracts evaporated. Applause mixed with jeers. Scholz leaned in, his exhale audible over the din. Berlin loses $312 million if they walk, but the victims, Ukraine's 4,500 monthly casualties, pay the real price. Back in London, Starmer watched the feed on a secure line from Chequers, the countryside estate's library smelling of aged leather and wood smoke. Lammy burst in, tablet in hand. Sir, elite backlash, city firms lobby hard, Barclays warns of 1.2% GDP hit if tariffs follow. And new interests. The Americans sniffing around. Blinken offering bilateral aid to sideline EU entirely. Starmer rose, pacing the Persian rug. Counter with our probe. Release the full French memo. $1.2 billion in kickbacks, tied to 15% of SAFE's air defense tranche. Healy nodded, but his voice dropped. Risky. NATO's Jens Stoltenberg just called, concerned about fractures. If we push, he mediates, but on their terms. The plenary adjourned in chaos, MEPs clustering like storm clouds. Von der Leyen retreated to a side alcove, the stone walls cool against her back. Her phone vibrated. A text from a Berlin contact. Scholz wavers, pushes for UK compromise to avoid probe. She pocketed it, glancing at Macron, who avoided her eyes. Society reacted swiftly. Berlin rallies swelled to 8,000, demanding clean funds. London tabloids screamed EU hypocrisy exposed. The elite divided. German industrialists courting UK ties, French unions threatening strikes over lost Dassault jobs, 25,000 at stake. As dusk fell over Strasbourg, Starmer's secure call connected to Stoltenberg. Keir, this revelation poisons the well. Russia's gains? 18% more territory, 450 kilometers weekly. Mediate? Starmer hesitated, the fire crackling in the grate. Only if parity, no vetoes. But in the audit's annex, overlooked amid the frenzy, lay a bombshell, intercepted comms showing a UK aids payoff, $500,000 from a Baltic firm to grease NATO bypasses. The hook sank deeper, threatening to drag them all under. The NATO headquarters in Brussels buzzed with encrypted chatter, the glass atrium reflecting the gray November sky like a distorted mirror. Ursula von der Leyen arrived unannounced, her coat draped over one arm as she nodded to Jens Stoltenberg in the secure conference suite. The room smelled of fresh varnish and machine oil from a nearby server rack. Scholz joined via video from Berlin, his screen flickering to life amid stacks of briefing papers. Jens, the fractures run deep. UK's probe on French fees, $1.2 billion, has MEPs baying. We need your leverage now. Stoltenberg leaned forward, his Norwegian accent cutting the tension. Ursula, Olaf, NATO's eastern flank, 22 divisions stretched thin, Russia's 450,000 troops probing daily. SAFE's $150 billion is vital, but exclusion risks 15% shortfall in Allied munitions. In London, Keir Starmer convened his war cabinet in the Cabinet Office's crisis room, walls lined with screens displaying real-time intel, red dots marking Russian advances, 18% territorial gains in Ukraine this year. David Lammy spread a legal brief across the oak table. The EU's invocation of Article 122 TFEU challenged in the ECJ but twisted against the UK. Prime Minister Brussels files today, claims our NATO pacts violate post-Brexit security accords. If ECJ rules adverse, $22 billion in trade tariffs snap on, hitting our steel exports by 28%. Starmer's fingers drummed the armrest, a steady rhythm in the hush. John Healey interjected, voice gravel. And Stoltenberg's call? He warns mediation fails, NATO withholds $2.5 billion in joint exercises. Our Typhoon upgrades stall, costing 7,000 jobs in the Midlands. Von der Leyen's backroom push unfolded in Stoltenberg's antechamber, the air thick with the faint tang of coffee grounds. She laid out the institutional trap, a proposed ECJ injunction freezing UK bids until parity. Jens informed them full $6.75 billion or exclusion. We've cut to $2 billion, but Starmer counters with $300 million, laughable against $12 billion in contracts they crave. Stoltenberg nodded, scrolling projections. Safe loans at 1.5% fueling 2,500 tanks. But UK absence inflates costs by $450 million for Germany. Scholz's image pixelated slightly. Olaf here. Berlin pressures our $312 million exposure rises 4.5% without them, but France resists. Macron threatens veto on any compromise below 50% non-EU cap. A aide slipped von der Leyen a note. ECJ filing submitted, citing UK's $1.8 billion reroutes as disloyal competition. Starmer's counterattack launched from Downing Street, a flurry of calls to allied capitals. He patched through to Dutch PM Dick Schoof, the line secure but staticky. Dick, your F-35 data swap, $800 million value, hangs if ECJ bites. Push Brussels, joint procurement clause under. NATO Article 5 trumps their fund. Schoof hesitated, papers rustling. Here we're in, but von der Leyen's threats land. Tariffs on our ports, 12% hike if we side with you. Still, 62% of our drones rely on UK tech. The pressure mounted. Lammy fielded a call from Blinken. US offers bilateral arms, $5 billion package, but conditional on ditching EU games. Starmer exhaled sharply, the room's clock ticking toward noon. Accept, but leak the terms. Show Brussels we're not isolated. The escalation crested in a leaked ECJ docket hitting wires at 2 p.m. Brussels demands interim ruling by December 5th, potentially barring UK from 70% of SAFE's cyber tranche, $8 billion in firewalls against Russian hacks, up 14% this quarter. Protests swelled outside the Berlaymont, 10,000 EU citizens waving signs, no UK free ride, while London saw 6,000 countering with end EU blackmail. Von der Leyen watched from her office, rain lashing the windows. Macron phoned, furious. Ursula, your injunction exposes our fees. Dassault stocks down 3.2%, 15,000 jobs threatened. She cut him off. Pressure works both ways. Starmer folds or NATO steps harder. In the crisis room, Healey burst in with a tablet. Sir, Stoltenberg's verdict. Mediate tomorrow, but on safe terms, or UK loses Article 4 consultations, our voice on 1.2 million Russian troops silenced. Starmer stood, pacing the carpet worn thin by predecessors. The stakes surged. Not just funds, but the system's core. NATO's unity cracking under $150 billion weight. Lammy's phone buzzed. A whisper from a Paris source. Macron's betrayal brewing. He's offering France veto power in exchange for your head. As night cloaked Brussels, von der Leyen boarded her jet for the G20, the dossier's shadows lengthening. The institutional hammer fell, but in its rebound, a deeper fracture. Scholz's quiet overture to Starmer, hinting at a German-UK axis to dismantle the fund from within. The G20 summit hall in Rio de Janeiro pulsed with the low hum of interpreters and the sharp clink of champagne flutes, but in the secure annex off the main floor, the air hung heavy with the scent of polished teak and cooling tea. Ursula von der Leyen sat across from Keir Starmer, flanked by Stoltenberg and a rotating cast of aides. Macron absent, his jet delayed by technical issues in Paris. The table bore the scars of negotiation, scattered folios, a half-empty water pitcher, timelines scrawled on a whiteboard. November 30th deadline circled in red. Von der Leyen opened with a measured tap of her pen. Here, the ECJ injunction holds. UK's exclusion from SAFE's $150 billion core, 70% of procurement, activates at midnight. Reforms begin. Buy European clauses tighten to 65%. Loans at 1.8% for compliant states. Your firms? $12 billion in contracts rerouted to Thales and Rheinmetall? Starmer's eyes narrowed, the tropical humidity beating on his forehead. He slid a revised accord across, pages crisp, stamped with Downing Street seals. Ursula, Jens, this ends the fractures. UK commits $5.2 billion phased over 2 years for 45% sourcing access. No vetoes, but joint NATO oversight on 20% of cyber funds. $8 billion total, shielding against Russia's 14% hack surge. In return, drop the probe on our PACs. We'll bury the French memo. Stoltenberg interjected, his voice a steady anchor. NATO demands it. Eastern flank, 1.2 million Russian troops. Ukraine's losses at 4,500 monthly. 18% territorial bleed this year. Exclusion costs us 22% in air cover. This accord restores it. Von der Leyen paused, glancing at her tablet. Projections showed SAFE intact at $148 billion effective, but with UK in, industrial output jumps 12%. 2,500 tanks rolling by 2027. The development unfolded in heated bursts, aides whispering in corners as calls lit up secure lines. Scholz patched in from Berlin, his face gaunt on the split screen. Olaf here, Germany's $312 million exposure halves with this, but Macron resists. French Parliament votes tomorrow on vetoing any UK leniency, 58% public backlash over the $1.2 billion fees scandal. Starmer leaned in, voice low. Then let him. We've got the Dutch and Nordics, $800 million tech swaps locked, pulling 15% of SAFE's drone tranche our way. World reacts. Blinken's envoys in the hall, offering U.S. bilateral $5 billion but conditional on EU unity. Fracture now, and NATO's Article 5 credibility drops 28% in polls. Von der Leyen exhaled slowly, the room's ceiling fans whirring like distant rotors. She initialed the accord, ink bleeding slightly. Agreed, but new rules, annual audits, no shadows. Europe's security isn't a la carte. The climax crested as signatures dried, the annex door bursting open. Macron's deputy, breathless, waving a tablet. Paris folds. Vote ties 312-312. Abstentions tip it. But the cost? Macron resigns by dawn, citing irreconcilable divisions. Gasps rippled. Von der Leyen stood, her chair scraping the floor. Personal tolls mount. France's Dassault loses 25,000 jobs projected, stocks down 5.4% overnight. Starmer rose too, extending a hand, firm, unyielding. And London? Our majority holds, but Healy's under fire. Resignation rumors swirl if contracts lag. Stoltenberg nodded gravely. I step back post-accord. New Secretary General eyes unity. Stakes resolved, not positions, but the system endures. Outside, the summit's roar swelled, leaders milling under chandeliers, toasts to fragile peace. States reacted. Berlin hails pragmatic pivot, boosting Scholz approval to 42%. Warsaw pledges $2 billion more to SAFE, eyes on Russian borders. The world watches. U.S. Congress debates mirroring funds. China probes weaknesses with 7% trade tweaks on EU steel. Von der Leyen and Starmer exited together, flashes popping like gunfire. In the corridor, she turned. What changed? Power's structure bends, not breaks. 150 billion flows, but with checks. Europe's sense? No more illusions of solo strength. Unity's the blade. Back in Brussels, the Berlaymont's lights burned late, aides shredding old dossiers, 6.75 billion ghosts banished. Von der Leyen gazed out at the dawn-lit plaza, the EU flag stirring in the breeze. She grew in the forge, Commission President unchallenged, legacy etched in steel and circuits. Starmer, aboard his flight to Heathrow, reviewed the accord, broken in parts but rising. UK's voice amplified in NATO, economy shielded from 1.2% GDP hit. Macron's fall echoed, a disappearance into political twilight. His ambitions shattered on favoritism's rocks. The structure of power realigns. SAFE evolves to $160 billion by 2028, inclusive pacts with third states like Norway and Ukraine, 12% of funds earmarked for joint ops. Resignations ripple, French defense minister out, UK's Lammy elevated to deputy PM, the country's soul stirs, Britain reclaims its stake without supplication, Europe sheds Brexit scars for shared shields. Russia's shadow recedes, 450 kilometers. Gains halted as munitions flood east. In closed rooms worldwide, the lesson lingers. Threats forge alliances, not grudges. The game renews, sharper, unbreakable.